Dear Ajahn, this morning my mind became peaceful and my breath became subtle. It was hard to notice it. Then there was blue and purple lights, circular, appearing, and then a diffuse white light, along with a feeling of happiness. At this stage, should I focus on the light or something else? The breath is imperceptible. So all of this is a good sign. The feeling of happiness will be the mental sukha, the pure mental happiness that comes from good meditation, right mindfulness, right concentration. So some people see lights when their mind begins to become peaceful. It's quite common, and these are the colors: purple, blue, sometimes yellow, often white. So as far as I've been taught, we don't try to grasp the color. We're not doing kasina meditation. So it's like the awareness, the consistent awareness of the breath is what inclined the mind to be peaceful. And so what my teachers have encouraged me is you just try to stay still. Try to stay peaceful. And then if you see colors, then it's just like seeing. Just like you would note a thought as a thought, a feeling as a feeling. It's actually the same thing. It's actually visual consciousness on a more subtle level. So it is sights. So it's just seeing, not becoming fascinated, just knowing. But you try to take wherever it was that you were feeling, observing the breath. Some people it's here, some people it's here, some people it's here. So what I try to do is, when my mind becomes peaceful and I can't perceive the breath, I just try to stay in the center of the awareness and stay still. You're taking the peaceful collectedness then as the object. And you stay still and quiet as you can for as long as you can. And then the mind will come out of that itself. When it's had enough peacefulness, it will come out of that itself, and then you pick up the awareness of the breath again. But it is a good sign. Dear Ajahn, I have a strong attachment to people whom I have lost. It is affecting my practice. I have a craving to meet them or talk. How can I release my attachment so that I may practice more peacefully? So the thing about attachments to loved ones, it's difficult to undo in the moment. The real problem is the thousands of moments that you loved them before. So if you really love somebody, you see them in the morning, oh, I love you, darling. See them, oh, I still love you. And even, oh, I still love you. Really nice people, you love them very deeply. But you may have some weeks, some months, some years, some tens of years loving somebody, then you're separated from them. You can't make yourself not love them. You cultivated the attachment. So I guess what I would encourage is that you contemplate your own death and impermanence, your own upcoming death. So it's like you also, you will die, and those people who love you will miss you. And it's like it helps kind of put it in perspective. It's not just those people who die or who you get separated from. You also have to go on, and so we have to kind of sober the mind, put it onto. So we do that. We do dedicate merit to relatives and friends. We spread loving kindness. The first stage is to have loving kindness for those who are. It's easy to have loving kindness towards. That tends to be our friends, people we care for deeply. And then that can stimulate, oh, I miss that person. Oh, we had such a nice time. Oh, I wonder how they are. And so we have to have several anusatis as well. So we have the marananusati. We remind ourselves, I might die today. And that tends to have a sobering effect on the mind. And we just have to accept the inevitability of being separated from the loved, and the fact that we could be moving on today ourselves. And so we have to alternate the metta bhavana to gladden the mind, brighten the mind. When there's attachment, we remind ourselves that we could die today. And we don't do it, it's not a punishment, we're not doing it to depress yourself, you're doing it to make the mind sober. And we understand that sobriety is a beautiful quality, clarity. Sobriety inclines the mind towards being willing and happy to be still. So it's a gift to ourselves to just contemplate truth. This is the truth. Contemplating the truth is what wakes the mind up from deluded states and helps us let go of our craving and attachment. Sometimes there can be some resistance, and so then you have to be a bit determined. There's something in the mind, no, I'm not going to die today. And it's like, really? And, Tanajana Nun was here the other day at the Chedi, which is very, very blessed, 300,000 blessed amulets, Buddha relics, Arahant relics, Deva relics. This monk, his attendant, is 1.5 meters from an Arahant, stood on a snake, and the snake bit him. So don't tell me you might not die today. You might die today. He didn't die, by the way. But the point is, it could have been a venomous snake. On that occasion, it wasn't. And a lot of people come to Anandagiri and they feel like they're in a resort. Oh, it's so beautiful. And they get a bit kind of daydreamy. It's like, well, there happens to be a 20,000 acre forest there. And sometimes I'm walking back from the evening chanting and there's a python heading towards the eating sala and heading towards the cats. I throw a stone at it and say, you don't eat my cats. Tell the cats, be careful, there's a big snake there. Coming out of my kuti to come to the evening chanting one night, 5-meter king cobra. So, you could die today. Please don't die today. But you could. Many, many people die in their bathrooms. As many people die in their bathrooms as die from car crashes, apparently. They didn't wake up and think, oh, let's go and die in the bathroom. They just had a shower, and the thing is, when you're feeling home and you're feeling comfortable, maybe the phone rings. Maybe you realize you're late. Too long in the bubble bath. So nice. Rose lavender smell. Oh God, I've got to go to work. Get up, or pick the kids up from football, whatever it is. And they get up and they slip, and there's a lot of hard surfaces. They hit their head, they die. A lot of people die in the bathroom. So we just have to, these are the kind of things we remind ourselves, I really could die today. And then it'll be other people who'll be missing me. Sober up the mind, keep the mind balanced. But you can't kind of, there's not a quick fix to a deep loving attachment because you cultivated it, most of us cultivated over decades. So you have to learn how to contain it and slowly uproot it. In the future, as practitioners of mindfulness, we have to, Ajahn Nun is always saying, may yin di, may yin lai, not falling into deeply liking or deeply not liking. In the future, we have to have metta for people, wish them well, and actually love them a bit less. We have to try not to be as attached to people. And when we know that every relationship changes, sometimes best friends become enemies. Is a practice in Mahayana Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism, when cultivating boundless impartial metta, we consider the fact that sometimes our best friends become our enemies. When we're thinking of the people who we don't like, then the inverse can be true. That person may be your best friend in the future when conditions change. So where there is love, there is also suffering. When love can change to hate, right? So sometimes the people that you love the most, the ones that hurt you the most, and then you end up not liking them so much. So we have that wisdom, we have that understanding, and so in all of our relationships we try to love them just the right amount. And the foundation of the relationship should be metta, with not too much attachment. It's easy to say, but it takes practice. Yeah. True. Dear Ajahn, on occasions when I have a very hectic day at work, or going through a peak period with more demands and activities, it is sometimes difficult to settle down in meditation. The body is not settled. The adrenaline level can still be felt within the mind. The mind is still filled with planning activities. Kindly advise the best practice to handle this. So in such a state, I would recommend chanting. So a half an hour of vigorous, loud chanting. And if you do it in Pali, it's even better. It's like I once got the lay people, several times I've got the lay people here to chant the Dhammacakka, Anatta and Adita Pariyaya Sutta. The Dhammacakka, the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, and the fire sermon back to back takes about an hour if you chant it nice and fast. So if you're chanting in a different language fast, it's actually not possible to have a parallel thinking process. You really have to be paying attention to that chant. And it can be possible when it's the normal evening chanting and you know it like the back of your hand. You can be thinking, oh, I should call my mum. I haven't called her for a few weeks. And while you're chanting, yo, so, bhagawa, I got to call mum. That can happen. But when you and it's quite embarrassing if you do lose your thread when you're the one with the microphone. If you're like number 2 or number 3, you can go off and nobody notices. But if you're number 1 and you're like, I had to do that a couple of months ago, I had to say, where were we at again? And I was thinking that. I was thinking, oh, I really do have to call my mum. And then I lost my thread. And I'm like, oh, was it Swa? Were we at the Dhamma or the Sangha? Dhamma Raja. Okay, yes, the Dhamma. So, yes, it happens to the best of us. Chanting. Chant it, and it'll be a very interesting experiment. There is energy, there's adrenaline, there's thought activity. Direct that into the chant and see what happens. What's it like after 20 minutes? You might still have a bright, energized mind, but it's not thinking about those other things because you've changed kind of tracks. So that's what I would recommend. If it's still somewhat scattered, then walking meditation, fast walking meditation. But fast walking meditation can also feed restless thoughts. So just experiment. But in general, chanting is a underestimated practice. One of the things Tanajan said at his Katina talk was that chanting is very important, very helpful, because precisely this reason, it gathers a scattered mind into a wholesome track. It's a great preliminary for formal meditation, but also it wakes up a sleepy mind as well, and it cheers up a depressed mind. So it can be used generally to bring the mind into more balance. Dear Ajahn, I feel whenever I use something like the Buddha Barikamma to focus, it gives pressure on the right side of my head and jaw. Instead, what has been successful for me is expansive practices like walking, long metta sits, and then resting attention to the breath. Is this okay? Yes. So, whatever works. And walking meditation is a large part of the forest tradition, particularly after the meal. The forest monks having a large meal in the day, the mind gets, in the morning, the mind gets groggy as the temperature goes up as well. But Luang Por Chah, Luang Por Man did not encourage the monks to go back and have a sleep straight after the meal. That's very not helpful for mindfulness. So the monks would do walking meditation before taking a midday nap. And then I find whenever I do that, the mind doesn't fall asleep for as long and it wakes up already with some clarity. Because before you had the nap, you did have some mindfulness. You'd been generating the mindfulness. So the mind sleeps as much as it needs to. It wakes up and you have clarity there. So walking meditation is very good and can be used in various ways. And I think one problem that modern people can have is, as particularly busy people who are effective, if they're trained at directing their mind in certain ways. See, there's actually no problem with the Buddha. The problem is more probably the amount of effort we bring to it is creating stress. And the Buddha itself, ideally, should be very light. And but if we've trained ourselves to use our thoughts in willful ways, and many successful people do, then you might need to go through some steps. Really be in the body, really calm down, and then observe the breath. Dear Ajahn, in my practice I am seeing more and more the unsatisfactoriness of worldly things and phenomenon. Instead of dispassion, it seems like my aversion increase. How do I pepper my practice with more joy or more wholesome mind states instead of feeling miserable and irritable? Satu. So, it's actually a good sign. That's why I'm kind of chuckling to myself. When a monk reads, I see more the unsatisfactoriness of worldly things, and the monk is thinking, good. And the lay people are thinking, oh, what's wrong? So this This is we will go through it a bit later, but if you read the last paragraphs in I think it's the Anatalakkhana Sutta and the Adittapariyaya Sutta, the Sutta on Not Self and the Fire Sutta, the last paragraph is really wonderful when it says the mind becomes weary. Through becoming weary, it becomes dispassionate. Through becoming dispassionate, the passions fade. So that all sounds depressing, right? Weary, dispassionate, passions fade. You need to read the next sentence. The mind is liberated. The mind becomes weary, dispassionate, the passions fade, the mind is liberated. So there's a process that's occurring there. It's when we deludedly think that the conditions in the world are going to give us happiness, we're passionate. When we pay attention to the truth and we see that sensual pleasure is fleeting, doesn't last for very long, and quickly disappears, and then there's craving for more, we see that it never can bring happiness. Lord Buddha gives the analogy of a dog chewing on a bone. There's never any meat there. And but one of the things Ajahn Sumedho says, very important, we'll probably have a look at the Sutra on the Unconditioned, because that which knows, the awareness that knows unsatisfactoriness, we have to train ourselves to. It's a subtle thing, and it's a difficult thing to quantify and really recognize the value of, because it has an empty nature, and it's more of an absence of things that make us suffer. We have to train ourselves to recognize what a good quality of awareness is like, and how peaceful the mind is when it rests in that awareness. And Ajahn Sumedho says that which knows suffering is not suffering. And that's very important to train ourselves to recognize. And other ways of saying that is we try to separate out the awareness from the object. And then we try to rest in that awareness. And the thing is, as the mind gets more peaceful and more sensitive, it's like a magnifying glass, you can still see the suffering. But there's this nice, spacious, cool awareness that is seeing that, aware of that suffering. It's not the only thing in the picture. And we do have to train ourselves to notice that the awareness itself is pleasant. And the way to notice it is when you have less of it and you suffer more. It's like, oftentimes it's like in hindsight. You think there's a lot of, I've seen this many times, people think there's a lot of suffering in their retreat, day 2, day 3, they kind of look miserable. By day 7 they're all kind of shiny and happy, and it's like, it takes a while for that awareness and knowing quality to get powerful, and when it is, there's a lot of rapture and tranquility and serenity that comes with it. So anyway, I'm very happy for you that you see unsatisfactoriness and are feeling weary, because it's progress, but this is where we need to do the metta.
Taking that awareness as a self-suffering?
Sorry?
Taking that awareness as a self-suffering?
No, the awareness is not suffering.
But assuming it as a self-suffering?
Identifying with anything that awareness is aware of is suffering. So you just rest in mindfulness. You just use the word mindfulness. Sati sampajanya, that quality of knowing. We don't think of it as a self. It's just, it is awareness. And then, but the metta practice is like, we do need to support. Like I was going through this as a young monk, and Tanajanana told me to do metta practice for myself for the first 10 minutes of every sitting session. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because we want to go beyond self. We want to not have a self. But the thing is, we do. That's another thing Tanajan said in his Dhamma talk. He says, you have strong faith. You have merits, you've got yourself to the monastery, you have faith in the teachings on anicca, dukkha, anatta, and you have faith that Lord Buddha realized emptiness, you have faith in emptiness, but you do have a sense of self. When you're chanting, there's a sense of self of somebody chanting. When you're sitting, there's a sense of self while you're sitting. And he says, that's normal, and we just have to do enough practice to see through it in moments. But he actually recommended one of the things to do if the mind isn't becoming peaceful is to actually think of the wholesome things that you did and gladden the mind, because a joyful mind is much more likely to settle on the breath than an irritated, agitated, restless one. But it's important when we do that, where we don't create a big ego out of it, but we just acknowledge that going to Wat Mapchand's Katina was wholesome, joining in that, paying respects to the Sangha was wholesome, and breathing in, I rejoice in my good efforts, breathing out, I rejoice in my good fortune. Going on pilgrimage is wholesome, breathing out, breathing in, I rejoice that I went on pilgrimage. It's a sense of self, right? But it's a wholesome one. And Tanajananand, he also says, I asked him once, when the Anya Kondanya became a stream enterer, listening to the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, he was the first human to become a stream enterer. I asked him, did any devas become enlightened? Do devas become enlightened? And he answered, only devas become enlightened. I said, what do you mean, Tanajan? He says, the mind that has insight has metta, has patience, has forgiveness as part of its foundation. You have the patujana, the coarse worldly being. Then you have the kalyana jana, the lovely being. It's the kalyana jana that becomes the arya jana, the noble being. So that we have to have lovely qualities. You're allowed to have a wholesome sense of self. In fact, we need it. And then you do your vipassana, you do your anusatis, you do them consistently, and you will begin to have deep insights into not self. But you can't make yourself not have a self. We bring the sense of self kind of pervades everything in the beginning, but we can make it wholesome, and we can do lots of practice so that that awareness that knows a thought as a thought gets more profound. Awareness that knows a feeling as a feeling, awareness that knows a body as a body. The awareness gets more and more spacious, less and less identified with these things. Then the mind will begin to have these insights. But with regards to practicing with despair, irritation, we do have to make it part of our discipline that we bring an antidote quality, which is the loving kindness. Loving kindness has a wonderful effect of helping us to be able to abide with things as they are. It has this quality to be accepting. So sometimes we see the unsatisfactoriness, and then we feel the weariness, and we want to get liberated quickly. So there's irritation and aversion. I want out of this place. I can see that it's not worth it. And but the 5 spiritual powers, the spiritual faculties might not yet be sharp enough to have the profound liberating insight. So what do? You do have to support the mind in its process of awakening. So that means breathing in, may I be well. Breathing out, may I be happy. Breathing in, may I be well. Breathing out, may I be happy. Until there is well-being in the mind. That then is the foundation for being able to have it for your situation and all beings' situation in the world. So the first 10 minutes of every sit, probably, for this person, you probably have to do it. And we don't stop at just ourselves, because that can become vanity. You're having metta for yourself, special metta for yourselves. And Tanajananand told me in the early years to then spread metta to him. It's very interesting. It's not like he needs it. He can enter metta jhana on one in-breath. He didn't need my metta. But the point is, I loved him, had deep faith in him. So when I wanted to radiate loving kindness towards my teacher, it flowed forth very strongly. So then there's a lot of metta in the mind. Then there's less despair, less weariness. And then it's easy then to go on to other teachers, parents, friends, once you get it kind of flowing. So we start with oneself, beings who are near and dear, and then more numbers of neutral beings, eventually the difficult beings, eventually all beings. So, dear Ajahn, I struggle with feelings of self-hate and self-loathing. I've tried many methods, repeating phrases, imagining an environment of love and acceptance, accepting that I have these feelings, etc., but nothing seems to shift. Do you have any other advice? When the Dalai Lama started to teach Westerners, he didn't know, with all of his wisdom, he didn't know that this existed. Self-loathing or guilt. Apparently the Tibetans don't experience it. And because they were always talking in the Tibetan to not have self-cherishing. So self-cherishing is a terrible thing. We should cherish others. We should cherish all beings. But when someone explained this concept to him, he was like, huh? Oh, no, don't do that. No, you must have a healthy sense of self-care. That is necessary. We must have healthy self-care as our foundation. How are we going to help anyone else if we don't care for ourselves? So when it was explained to him, he was like, no, don't do that. The issue is, I think if people got a lot of negative reinforcement from parents in early childhood, this habit can be very deep. Another way that it can happen is if you were just kind of ignored by one or both of your parents, you may internalize a feeling of not having much worth, something's wrong with you. And stuff that goes in deeply on a pre-verbal level can be hard to dislodge. It's like, and I think clinical psychologists recognize that the first 3 years of a human being's life are really important. And you see the way that Thais care for babies, it's very nice. Like they never tell a child to shut up. If a baby cries, they let it cry. Somebody kind of nurses it. If they get sick of it, they hand it to someone else who's willing to nurse it. They don't raise their hands at them. They don't raise their voice at them. They understand that children cry. They let them cry. And but it is helpful when you have a village culture and the whole village helps to raise the children. Like one stressed out mother can go for a walk and the auntie will keep an eye on the kid or whatever. And it's much more difficult in houses where people have a more stressful lifetime, or single parents, or people going through divorces, or goodness knows, career stress, whatever things might be occurring for the parents that make it difficult for them to give unconditional love and patience to a child. We're actually very vulnerable and fragile creatures, unfortunately. So these habits can be powerful. And I used to experience it for the first 3 or so years of my bhikkhu life. I did have self-aversion and self-loathing and even some suicidal thoughts. And one thing that I would do was I would lie on my, if that mind state came and it was a bit strong, I would lie on my kuti and I would put my right hand over my heart. And I would try to spread loving kindness from my hand into my heart. And I had studied massage, Swedish massage, Thai massage. I don't know, there might have been some kind of healing capacity in the hands at least, to just kind of put love not from here, and just kind of, so I just use that word, love, and I would make this kind of resolution: I'm not moving, I'm not getting up until this mind state changes. I'm not moving until there's a moment of love. I think you're lying down, so it's fairly comfortable. Okay, you might be there for an hour or two. And it's like these kind of things are like chinks in the armor, ways to kind of melt these old habits. Intention is very powerful. So just in setting the intention that you really will develop loving kindness for yourself, it is powerful. It's already beginning to work, but it might take some real resolution to really, really mean it. And so sometimes just to get comfortable, put your hands on your heart. Okay, I'm not moving until I have a moment of loving kindness for myself. And once the mind experiences what it's like to not have an oppressive self-aversion attitude, and what it's like to have a moment of metta, it will be more receptive to having more of those, in my experience. So I don't really experience that mindset anymore. I did 27 years ago. And so in my experience, it does shift. But we may have to be determined and disciplined. Then also notice when it's not there. So we tend to have this habit, even if a mindset is frequent, there's no way it's there all the time. And we make this mistake of thinking, I always think such and such, I always feel such and such, and no, you don't. So you have to notice when there isn't self-loathing present, when the mind's just in an ordinary state and it's kind of okay. It might not be feeling illustrious joy, but it's not hating itself either. We have to notice this. Notice the wholesome mind states, negative mind states, and neutral mind states. So I offer those for your reflection. We can continue meditating now. Maybe another. Shall we sit together for 45 minutes? And then people can walk if they want to.